Hello, welcome to Credible Talk. I'm Aarica Mims.
I'm Eric Hage. This is the podcast where we get to talk about all things commercial real estate and a lot more.
And we are so excited to have Mark Masinter joining us today. Mark is the chairman of Global Retail at Newmark and is the founder of Open Realty and Ignite Realty Partners. We consider Mark the retail guru, having been affiliated with projects for Apple, Tesla, Restoration Hardware. I mean, the list could go on and on and on and on. But, I mean, some of the biggest and best mixed-use projects in the area and in the country also.
That's right. Mark and his firm actually worked alongside KDC at the Legacy West development. And Mark really spearheaded with FEME the whole retail environment that's out there today. So we've got to witness Mark in his prime. and I personally have admired the work that Mark has done. So thank you, Mark, for coming here today and spending some time with us. So we got the opportunity to visit with you, Mark, a little bit ahead of this call the other week. And I think the first thing that we wanted to ask you and let the audience know a little bit more about is just exactly how did you get into the retail business? And that's question one. And then the second question is including your time with working with Steve Jobs.
Yeah. Well, thank you for having me. It's really fun to be here, and I've loved my experiences with KDC, and it's fun to go up north and see our collective work product and see that the impact that it's had on the community and that it continues to get better and better. And that was fun. How did I get in the retail real estate business? Probably by accident, actually. I mean, not totally by accident, but I'm from Atlanta, Georgia. I got to Dallas by way of SMU. I had every intention of moving back to Atlanta after I graduated from school. And then I met a girl.
Oh, well.
And those Texas girls are hard to move to Georgia.
Yeah, yep.
And so here I am, 35 plus years, 3 kids, and now a grandchild, and I'm fully part of the Dallas community
Awesome.
now.
You're committed.
I'm committed. So I when I went to SMU, I had to work in college. In my sophomore year, I was hired by a gentleman at Cushman & Wakefield just to become his everything. You know, whatever he told me to do, I was going to do it. And I learned from him, just how to canvass buildings and cold call, and I learned the office tenant rep world through him and helped him start his business. He left Cushman, started his own business, and so I got to see someone start their own business and learn about that. And then I decided, literally right after graduating from college, I worked with him for a few months and just decided that I wanted to do something different. And I had completed 2 retail transactions while I was in college that I helped create. One was a deli in an office building. The other one was a Goodyear freestanding building. And so that was my retail experience. Yeah, it was very glamorous. But what I noticed while I was in college and getting out of college is the idea of a tenant rep was becoming a thing, but I didn't really see it in the retail world. And so I decided to kind of immerse myself in that world by learning about retail economics, learning about what a good retail real estate decision was or wasn't. And I found that it was very much a common sense business. You know a good location when you see it. The math that makes a retail or restaurant work from a real estate perspective is fairly easy. Real estate costs as a percentage of sales. You got to understand that. So it just became it's common sense to me, and so I gave it a whirl, and some guys gave me some office space to borrow and let me use their executive assistant, and I was off to the races and held up a shingle, and off I went with that and a lot of piss and vinegar.
Awesome. So when you were in the office tenant rep side of the business, you started initially just doing a lot of cold calls and stuff like that, I assume.
Yeah. That was it.
And then it wasn't until short time afterward that you realized that this whole office side of the business is just not my cup of tea. I'm really more interested in being around some smaller companies and fast-growing companies that need more retail locations.
Yeah, I didn't see the creativity in doing an office lease. It was just, it didn't, It didn't energize me. Transactionally, it seemed very valuable, but it wasn't scratching that creative itch for me. And then I just thought the idea of helping retail brands and restaurant brands grow around the continent was an interesting, dreamy idea. Eventually, it led to us doing some really interesting development because we learned what retailers and restaurateurs want. So,
was there a mentor that helped trigger this part of you?
I would say mentors came later because no one would have suggested to me it was a good idea to start a real estate business in 1986 when the savings and loan world was crashing, the oil and gas world was crashing, and I didn't have any money. I literally started on credit cards and credit cards. I was broke.
So what were your clients, your first clients that really made you think, okay, this is going to work. This is taking off now?
I would say my earliest lucky break was there was a guy that was at a company called Scandia Down. Do you remember the company Scandia Down? It was a luxury bedding company. Yeah. They got down blankets and luxury pillows and what have you, and they were growing. And I had actually met this guy when he was at a different retailer when I was in college, cold calling.
Funny.
And I just called him out of the blue, told him what I was doing. Thankfully, he said, "I'm going to give you a shot." I would not have given me a shot.
Yeah.
I didn't know what I was doing, and he was entrusting me with his growth strategy. And he actually provided me a little monthly salary, and it was unbelievable. And so, truth be told, I really learned retail real estate with him.
Yeah.
And I learned the country with
true.
him. I'd never done deals all over the country before. Barely did any in Dallas. And there I was, running around with all the major mall developers and learning the major cities. And that was my first real lucky break. And then luckily had a few more.
Let's talk about Restoration Hardware, because you had mentioned prior that Restoration Hardware became a company that you became personally involved with for a long period of time.
Yeah.
At its inception. So how did you get joined to the hip with them?
That was my first big lucky break. I had a dear friend who knew of my aspirations to grow my business, and I was also wanting to start trying to put some seed investments into some brands. I'd had a little bit of success, and I started to see some early stage companies come to us, and I was like, man, I'm where the rubber meets the road. Let's see if I can find some money to back some of these ideas. I had no idea what I was doing. She made an introduction to Steve Gordon, who was the founder of Restoration Hardware. She said, she goes, "You got to meet Steve. He's a great guy. He started this business in Aarica, California. He's now done a store in Berkeley on 4th Street. He's now done a store in Marin at a mall called Corte Madera, and we're going to do a deal with him at Newport Fashion Island. You got to meet this guy. I think he's it. He's got a great idea." So I said, outstanding. And so we had a call, and then the next thing you know, I flew out to San Francisco and went and met him with one of my partners at the store in Corte Madera. And we hit it off. And, through a course of, several meetings and conversations over, several months, and I still don't believe this actually happened, we were able to convince him that we knew how to grow his business and we could raise his growth capital.
Wow.
Neither which
you
really
don't ever see with a typical retail broker at that time. They don't help raise capital.
No, and it's funny, I never ever, and still don't use the word brokerage, because I didn't want to be a broker. I wanted to be thought of the same way a Bain or McKinsey was thought of, as a consultant, an advisor, very strategic. And real estate was part of what we brought to the table. Now I was faking it for a while, and now I can think we can actually say it. But so meeting Steve Gordon was really my lucky break, and then part of that was. Leads me to probably my first mentor is a guy named Marshall Payne. Marshall, he was at Cardinal Investments. He was partners with a guy named Rusty Rose. Marshall knew that I started seeing early stage companies. Marshall's a professional investor. I had no idea how to look under the hood of companies. And so he said, hey, when you see some interesting deals, we'll look at them with you. And
Cool.
So I called him one day after a conversation with Steve Gordon. I said, I think I found one. And so that led to my first experience investing in a company, thankfully guided by Marshall.
Yeah.
Wow.
So you've done all of the restoration hardwares across the U.S.
Yeah, the only one that's opened since the early 90s that we haven't been involved with is one that they just did outside of London.
Yeah.
And another one in Europe, but
Yeah, and the footprints have grown over the years, right? Now it's
Yeah.
just this big experience, and I feel like retail is shifting into this overall experience now, and I think it's partly because of restoration hardware.
I think you can look at 3 examples of 3 different brands we've been involved in, and there, I could give you many, but just look at restoration hardware, how it evolved. Look at Apple and why they decided to open stores.
Mm-hmm.
And look at Warby Parker, who started as a direct consumer brand, who really didn't think they were going to have physical retail at first, and then and see what four-wall retail has done for all of those brands. And so to kind of be at that table and be around these founders and entrepreneurs is kind of mind-blowing and fun. But what I'll tell you is, back to the mentor question, look, Steve Gordon became a mentor of mine just by being at the table with a founder, an entrepreneur,
Mm-hmm.
and somebody that had a revolutionary idea of going from a gifting business into the home furnishing business.
Yeah.
I learned a lot from him. And then the gentleman that took his place, Gary Friedman, who's now has been the CEO and chairman of Restoration Hardware for a long time now. He's an incredible visionary, and where he took that business from Restoration Hardware to RH,
Yeah.
mind blowing.
Yeah. Totally.
And look, we all get our ideas from other people to a certain degree, and I learned a lot about design and architecture by being at the table with Gary.
Yeah.
And watching him draw and scribble, and every blue moon he'd say, "What do you think?" But Gary's brilliant. And you talk about sizes of stores, right? RH was an 8,000 to 10,000 square foot store, but if you looked at their catalog, right,
Oh, yeah.
or you went online, you would see that they had thousands of more SKUs that weren't in the stores, but they would go into markets and have 3 or 4 stores. His thesis was, let's have one amazing store, like the one on Knox Street.
Yeah, that one's amazing.
Let's have a far deeper assortment so that our customers can truly see who we are and what we do and what we represent, and have a phenomenal experience. And then add food and beverage to it, so it's totally experiential.
You're spending half
and
a day there.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk about one retail visionary, Steve Jobs.
Yeah, you mentioned Apple was one of your top
Yeah.
3.
Yeah.
How
well,
did that come about?
It was.
And what was your first meeting like with Steve Jobs?
Well, again, it was. We were really lucky. We got a phone call. I was.
So somebody was sitting at the desk and just so happened.
No, it happened because Steve Jobs met Steve Gordon at Restoration Hardware, and it was
Oh.
Steve
Oh, wow.
Gordon who suggested he reach out to me, because Steve Gordon and Steve Jobs met, and right when Steve Jobs was thinking about Apple and a new way of presenting the goods, and Steve Jobs thought that the way Steve Gordon was growing his store base was interesting and informative. Steve suggested that he give us a call, and so one day out of the blue, while I was on the chairlift, I got a phone call.
And did you answer it, or did you send it to voicemail?
I didn't. Well, that's back when we had flip phones.
Oh, yeah.
Hey, Steve, let me make this run real quick down the,
Yeah.
down the mountain.
And let's just say that when someone suggested that Steve Jobs was on the other side of the line, and what I hold for him, that my response was not necessarily very polite, because why would he call me?
Sure.
Like, what can I tell him about his business. Luckily, we got another call back after I was pretty rude and said some bad words. And we were invited to Cupertino, and me and a few of my partners went out there and met Steve and met Ron Johnson, who was really the brains behind the whole retail story for Apple. That's who Steve Jobs partnered with, and really one of the smartest retail real estate brains in the world. His name was George Blankenship. And so, but that first meeting was with Ron Johnson. That was his second, I think it was his second or third day on the job. And
oh, wow.
and Steve Jobs and us. And that was a pretty unique day.
Well, tell us a little bit more about that day. Was it y'all presenting the whole time, and then they would
presenting like the growth strategy of Apple?
Yeah.
Or
Well, it was, we were lucky enough to get some idea of what Steve was thinking about. I mean, he was just back at Apple, right? And based on just the tidbits we were getting, there are very confidentiality at that company is everything, every tech company. And so we just got some morsels. So based on those morsels of information, we came out and kind of pitched an idea, and we pitched how we would grow the business, and we pitched a plan. And we were told that was a really bad idea. And I was called names and words that I've never been called before in a meeting, and it was quite an experience.
So out of the gates, it was a quick, you thought that you were getting exited out of the room.
Yeah, this is at the risk of sounding, well, I mean, not humble, but I say it very humbly. When you know your craft, right, and you're confident in your ability to execute in that arena, we've had a high degree of confidence that we were saying the right thing, and we were making the right calls, and we're making the right suggestions. We were told that Mr. Jobs was a very hard person to please. Mm-hmm. And at times could be a bit forceful and combative about his point of view. So we were prepared for, to get punched in the face a couple of times, and I enjoyed it. We argued our case passionately, and I think that's part of the reason why we connected.
He was testing you.
He was definitely testing our mettle, which I love.
It was probably good to have a little foresight on that, though.
Yeah, oh, for sure. And look, at the end of the day, Steve Jobs let Ron Johnson, he said, he trusted the guy who was running his business, and we were fortunate enough to, make the cut.
So you get the call, you got awarded the assignment to represent them. How do you staff up for that kind of explosive growth?
It's gradual. We really spent the first, really more than a year, just kind of creating strategy, and then starting to talk about the vision for what the Apple Store was going to be. It was a couple years before the first store opened.
Oh, wow.
Really?
And what was quite ironic, the first stores that opened, there were two stores that opened 3 hours apart. One on the East Coast at Tyson's Corner, and 3 hours later at Glendale Galleria. Both of those were in closed malls. Mm-hmm. Now, I say that's ironic because one of the most colorful arguments that Mr. Jobs and I had is that when he saw our original strategy, he said, "I will never do an Apple Store in a mall." And I said, "You'll never get to 400 stores." And what I learned is saying never to him is
it's a challenge.
It's like setting off dynamite. And ultimately he'd listen to us, and ultimately he'd listen to the guys that were leading his business, Ron Johnson and George Blankenship. The irony is we went from never to being the first two stores that ever opened in the history of Apple stores into
a mall.
2 malls.
Yeah.
I would much rather do stores on cool streets.
Right.
It's way cooler. but it's also really cool to do something that's commercially very successful. Being commercially successful was really important, especially right out of the gate.
Very neat.
Our conversation with Mark Masinter will continue in part 2, where we dive into Mark's work with Warby Parker, the future of office space, and the Henderson Avenue project in Dallas. Thanks for tuning into Credible Talk. We will see you for part 2.